One of my favourite stories, and I've told it to you before, so I'm not going to repeat it all, but in a nutshell, it's the story of a young German nobleman who went on a tour of Europe about 300 years ago, back in 1720, and he found himself in an art gallery in Dusseldorf, face to face with a painting that changed his life. And it's this one. It's called Ecce Homo, meaning behold the man. And it captures the moment when Pontius Pilate, having questioned Jesus, brings him out before the assembled crowd and says, behold the man, Ecce Homo, here he is. What shall I do with him? And they all reply, crucify him. This is the moment that Jesus is condemned to the cross. And underneath there is a postscript which says, can you see it? You can probably just see that on the wood at the bottom, but you can't read it quite. But it says, all this I did for you, what have you done for me? All this I did for you, what have you done for me? And after having been transfixed for hours by that picture, Count Zinzendorf, as he was known, went and founded the worldwide missionary movement. That picture changed him, and he changed the world. Now, if Jesus said that to you or to me, all this I did for you, what have you done for me? What would you say? And what would I say? Well, Lord, I went to church a lot. I taught Sunday school and G-Unit and things. I was in the leadership team, an elder. I was on this committee or that committee, all sorts of things. I was in the Anglican church. I was a church warden. I had them queuing up outside church when I was church warden. And how did you manage that, James? Well, I forgot to unlock the front door, actually. But nevertheless, James, you tried. Now, says Jesus, tell me, James, what did you do to help others to serve me? Sorry, look, say that again. What did you do to inspire other people, to encourage other people, to enable other people to serve me as well as yourself? Well, of course, I don't know. Of course, I mean, not so easy to answer, is it? A trickier question. But if the glory is for God, it's not so much the giver that matters, it's where the glory goes. It's about God's glory and not mine. Because quite a bit of my glorifying God has got a chunk of me in it, if I'm really honest. So if I help someone else to fan the flames of their gifting to glorify God, is that not just as good as using my own gifting, doing it myself? Now there's a thought, isn't there? So is that a thing? Do I do that? Do we do that? Am I aware of it? There's a song that we've often sung which says, it's not about me, Lord, it's all about you. Which brings us very neatly to the person of Barnabas. Now, if you're reading through the New Testament with us, you will have probably got to Barnabas by now. If you've got to somewhere around Acts chapter 9 or chapter 10, which is roughly where we should be at the end of this week, well, I can tell you're halfway through the New Testament in pages. I'm a big enough anorak to have counted. So I want to encourage you with that. But when you get to Acts 9, you eventually come into the company of Barnabas. Now, you'll have already met Barnabas, just very briefly, in Acts chapter 4, a one-verse pen picture. The fledgling church has become a sharing and a caring community. Nobody's in need because the wealthier people have been selling their lands and their houses and sharing the proceeds. And the one person who's named as having done this in the right way is Barnabas. He sold a field, he brought some money, and he laid it at the apostles' feet. But Barnabas, we discover, is not his real name. He's really Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus. But they call him Barnabas because it means son of encouragement. And that's exactly what he is. He's a generous man, not just with money, but also with his spirit. with the way he is, with praise and encouragement and help to build other people up. It takes generosity of spirit to be an encourager. And in fact, the name Barnabas comes from the Aramaic, the everyday language of the time. But when you translate it back into New Testament Greek, it comes out as Hios Parakletos, the son of the Paraclete, which is what the Holy Spirit is called, the one who comes alongside people. And he was a man who took time to come alongside others and encourage them and comfort them and strengthen them, which is what we find him doing in Acts chapter 9. Now, Barnabas is still in Jerusalem, but a lot has happened in the meantime. The early church has grown exponentially, but not without challenge. One of its early leaders, Stephen, a man full of God's grace, has been martyred, stoned to death, with the assistance and approval of a certain Saul of Tarsus. And this has triggered a huge persecution, led, it would appear, by the same Saul who has become the terror of the church, going from house to house, throwing Christians galore into prison, which very often meant death. Indeed, the Bible tells us his aim was to destroy the church, to finish off Christianity right at the start. Until, and I'm sure you know this, on his way to Damascus to wreak havoc with the Christian church there, he meets on the road with Jesus in the form of a blinding light, and his life's journey takes a U-turn from then on. Immediately, he's in danger. The Jews plot to kill him. They watch the gates of Damascus day and night to catch him, and he escapes in 007 drama by being lowered down from the walls of Damascus in a basket at the dead of night and brought to Jerusalem to meet the church proper, to a rapturous welcome. Well, actually, no, not at all. In fact, we're told that he tried to join the church and they were all afraid of him. He tells them the story that we know so well of that vision on the Damascus road, but they're having none of it. They don't believe him. Would you have believed him? I'm not sure I would have done. Your chief persecutor, Christian enemy number one, the scourge of the infant church, the stuff of every Christian's nightmare, says he wants to join. Panic stations. I mean, understandably, this is like the Antichrist in person knocking at the door. Think of the damage he could do. Nobody's going to be safe. Every church member's a potential target. The stakes are enormous. The future of Christianity is on the line. It's a make or break decision. Let him in, he could destroy everything. And not only that, people might start to leave in droves. Or would you keep him out and just play it safe? What would you have done? Elders and leaders, the membership interview from hell. Well, not actually from hell, because there's a very good reason why all this is happening. But, excuse me. But nonetheless, the trickiest membership interview in church history. And it needs a man of great faith and enormous courage to step into the breach. And that man is Barnabas. It's a very simple sentence, but it hides a mountain of courage. It could have cost him his life. Acts 9, verse 27. Barnabas took Saul and brought him to the apostles. He came alongside him. He told them his story. He vouched for him. And with that, the church's greatest evangelist is born. It's he, Paul, who will get the headlines. But behind those headlines is Barnabas. You want an example to follow? Be a Barnabas. Be a peacemaker, an enabler, an opener of doors for other people. And before long comes the next challenge for the early church. The Gentiles, the non-Jews, well, us lot, if you like. Are you going to let them in as well? Because you see, at least Saul was a Jew, born and bred. And this would have grated against the natural inclination of every Jewish heart. Jewish society was hyper-religious. All life revolved around religion, even if they got it wrong sometimes. But the Gentiles, they're a bunch of pagans, faithless, feckless, dogs in the mind of Jewish people. You can't let them in. That's the end of religion as we know it. Surely it's unthinkable. Does not every Jewish man pray every day, Lord, I thank you that I'm not a Gentile? But if Jesus said, go to the ends of the earth, that's got to mean Gentiles, hasn't it? And this is the debate. Is Christianity a worldwide religion or just a sideshow within the faith of Judaism? It's a big issue. It's a tipping point in the history of the church. Will that church be local or global? And because they've been persecuted, many Christians have fled to another city from Jerusalem called Antioch, about 300 miles away, and there are Greeks coming to faith. So that really is putting the church on the spot. Do we let them in or not? It needs some serious sorting out. The future of the church depends on it. And someone had better go to Antioch, which is one of the great cities of the ancient world, and sort it out. It needs a man with a heart for God and a level head and an open mind. Who shall we send? Who should go? Barnabas. And so off he goes. And sure enough, sees in Antioch evidence of the grace of God, and he encourages them, that word again, to stand firm in their new faith. Luke here, who is the author of the book of Acts, allows himself a little smile, a bit of a joke, a play on words. He says that the son of encouragement encouraged them. The son of the paraclete paracleted them. In other words, Barnabas Barnabized them. He was a good man, full of faith, and a great number were brought to the Lord. Now, some time has elapsed while all this has been happening, and what's happened to Saul? We learn from one of his letters that he'd been to Arabia and finally returned to his hometown of Tarsus. And then comes a little verse, which is the key to the building of the early church, really. Acts chapter 11 and verse 25. An unremarkable little factual verse, but the stepping stones for the future are in here. Then from Antioch, Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul and brought him back to Antioch. Now, this is not just around the corner. It's about 150 miles between these two cities. That's a 300-mile round trip. That's probably a week's journey each way. A big commitment for Barnabas to go there, and a big decision for Paul to return with him. Perhaps the most important journey in the New Testament, because now Paul is on the team. If this was a football team, it's a bit like signing Messi or Ronaldo. Who is the catalyst for all of this? Who sets it up? Who makes it possible? Barnabas again, because he recognizes in Paul a man who is tailor-made for this environment. Now Antioch wasn't just another place. It was the third biggest city in the Roman Empire. You know, I always tend to think, and probably you have too, that historically Jerusalem is kind of like the epicenter of the Middle East. Well, Antioch was between 5 and 10 times the size of Jerusalem. 5 and 10 times. It was where all the trade routes from the Far East converged on the Mediterranean. It was a melting pot of peoples and cultures. It was fertile ground for the gospel. The persecution in Jerusalem had propelled Christians to where they could be the most fruitful they could possibly be. And now into that mix comes the church's most committed evangelist. Paul is the key ingredient. Paul is the key ingredient, but Barnabas, the encourager who sees the potential of others, well, in a way, he's the cook. If Jerusalem is the cradle of Christianity, Antioch is its nursery. And the growth of the church moves up a gear, not just in Jerusalem, where it's bounded by the limits of a very distinct Jewish culture, but here in Antioch, in the big wide world, where people from far and wide come in and out. And naturally, Barnabas and Saul are in the middle of it. There's quite a community of prophets now and teachers. Antioch was the first place where Christians actually got called Christians. It was a dismissive term at the time, but they were happy to adopt it. And it stuck. And in this community, the Holy Spirit brings upon them the conviction that there is a new plan. and specifically for Barnabas and Saul. Now they'll leave Antioch and go to an even wider world and take the gospel with them on what we've come to know as Paul's first missionary journey. Now, Paul's journeys were not faith tourism. They were not a holiday adventure. We had a holiday in Turkey once, and we hired a car to drive down the coast, and part of that route is called the Lycian Way, and you're going in Paul's footsteps. And we seemed to not be too sure of exactly where we were on this journey. I need to say now, I was not lost. I'm a bloke. I am never lost. I knew where we were, and I knew where we should be, and I knew that they weren't the same place, but it wasn't my fault. I knew why we were in the wrong place. That was the map. A very badly drawn map, confusingly annotated, a rubbish map, not my fault at all. But we were going up a dirt road on the side of a mountain, probably in the wrong direction, and walking the Lycian Way was a young man coming along, an Englishman, and he was lost, definitely. And it was a hot afternoon, the sun was beating down, and the poor chap was all in, he really was. And we gave him a lift to call the places where he was heading. Well, this is where I hope he was heading anyway. And as for us, we had to retrace our steps and return the way we come. But I would like to reiterate here, there is no question of my having been lost at all. But if you went with Paul on his journeys, on foot in those hot climbs, that was the sort of thing you faced. It was a stiff challenge. And when you arrived at your destination, you would soon be faced with a distinct possibility of getting yourself duffed over. You see, these journeys weren't for faint hearts at all. And after they'd been to Cyprus, the next landing brought a casualty, a young man called John Mark, who apparently couldn't stand the pace and returned home. You see, driven people get things done. And if anyone was ever a driven person, that was Paul. But sometimes they leave casualties by the wayside. And this literally was John Mark, who returns home at this point. More of him, though, in just a minute. So minus John Mark, the journey continues into the centre of Turkey to the people of the epistles to the Galatians. Now, if you're Welsh or Irish or Scottish or perhaps even a Breton from France, if you are Celtic, if you speak Gaelic, if you're Gallic, the Galatians are your long-lost spiritual family. You've got Bible relations. Think about it. The French for Wales is the Pays de Galles. That starts the same way as Gaelic, the language, which is not the language of Wales, but of Ireland and Scotland. And the Galatians, all these words have a common root. And once upon a time, they were a common people. Not a common people, of course, they're a refined people, but they were one people. So if you are a Celt, if you like, you've got Bible relations. And this was an eventful journey that they went on, incurring death threats from the local Jewish believers, chased by an angry mob from one city to the next, hailed as gods in one place in Lystra, and a few minutes later, Paul being almost stoned to death. If you went with Paul, you put your body on the line. But they planted churches. They left growing congregations of Christians in every city. And that was the aim of the whole thing. Christianity flourishes in the big, wide Gentile world. And during the Bible account of this journey, something significant happens. Small, but meaningful. When Barnabas introduces the newly converted Saul to that Jerusalem church, it's very much Barnabas and Saul. When he goes and gets Saul again from Tarsus and brings him to Antioch, it's Barnabas and Saul. When they set off on this journey, it's Barnabas and Saul. But in the course of the journey, it suddenly becomes Paul and Barnabas. Paul has taken the lead because he's the theologian. He's the debater, the speaker, the great evangelist. And Barnabas, having identified these gifts, seems to have been ready to step back a bit and let them flourish. Still very much a partner, but not quite the main man anymore. If you like, Barnabas, like John the Baptist, who decreased so that Jesus could increase, Barnabas kind of decreases a bit so that Paul and the glory of Jesus may increase. Exactly what that looked like, I don't know. I wasn't there. But I bless Barnabas for being able to do that. And then when they get back to Antioch at the end of the journey, the Bible postscript for this is, God had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, to non-Jews. And as a result, Paul and Barnabas are sent to Jerusalem to present this truth and tell their story to the official leaders of the church. And now the big question is this: should Gentile believers have to follow Jewish laws? Now, this chapter, after all the drama that went before of murder plots and stonings and narrow escapes from death, seems a bit dry. But actually, this is big stuff. Another crucial point in the development of Christianity. Impose Old Testament laws on non-Jewish converts, and Christianity will always be tied to one specific culture. Free them from these rules and regulations, because after all, salvation is by faith in Jesus, not by a rule book. Free them from these rules and regulations, the brakes are taken off, and Christianity is set free to become a whole world religion. And that's exactly what happens as Barnabas and Paul argue passionately in favor of doing this. Jesus said, go to all the nations and preach the gospel, and now they will. Maybe Barnabas' part in this is his greatest achievement of all. And then, rather dramatically, comes a fresh turn to events. Paul says to Barnabas, let's do another journey. We can build up those churches we started, and maybe we can go further and start new ones. And Barnabas says, great idea, let's go. And we can take John Mark. It'll be much better this time. But Paul is not having that. John Mark let them down once. He's not getting another chance. And we're told that they had a sharp disagreement, which is very neat Bible language for a flaming row. Barnabas is the encourager. He sees the potential. He believes in people. He believes in second chances. And actually, of course, John Mark, we think, was his cousin, which does add a bit more spice to the argument. So they go their separate ways. Paul, now with Silas, goes off to Galatia as he'd planned, and on to Macedonia and infinity and beyond. And Barnabas, with John Mark, goes back to Cyprus, the first place they visited on that first journey. And as his boat leaves for Cyprus, Barnabas sails out of the New Testament. Incidentally, Barnabas wasn't wrong about John Mark. There was potential. And in fact, you know John Mark. If you're reading through the Bible with us, you've read his gospel. This will be the Mark who is the author of the second gospel. Now, would he have come to write it had Barnabas not taken him under his wing? I can't tell you the answer to that. It's an interesting question, but if he'd been rejected in that way by Paul, well, maybe he wouldn't have done. And that brings me to a key question as we come towards the end. How much of the New Testament do we lose if you take out Barnabas? Well, actually, it's just a few cameos in a couple of chapters of Acts, until in Acts 16, he sails off into the sunset. We never actually hear his voice as such. We never see him quoted. So really, it's a few verses, that's all. Or is it? It's Barnabas who shepherds Paul into a very suspicious first Christian church. It's Barnabas who leads Paul off on that first great journey, having first gone to get him in Tarsus and brought him back to Antioch. No Barnabas, no Paul. And furthermore, well, if Paul doesn't go on those journeys, no Luke. So no book of Acts, no Luke's gospel. No Barnabas, perhaps, we don't really know, but maybe no Barnabas, no Mark. Another gospel goes. And of course, if there's no Paul, most of the epistles disappear as well. And maybe even no Barnabas, no epistle to the Hebrews, because we don't know who wrote that epistle. And Barnabas is one of the most frequent suggestions as the author. So maybe we do hear his voice after all. But what I'm saying is that one way or another, without Barnabas, about 2/3 of the New Testament is gone. And the Barnabas story doesn't end there. Not his family story. Now, I've told you about John Mark being his cousin, but he also had a brother. And I think there's another slide we'd like if we can get one. This gentleman, Aristobulus. I don't suppose you've heard of him. Aristobulus. Church history tells us about the brother of Barnabas. He too was a missionary. In fact, he went much further than Barnabas did. All of the original disciples travelled far and wide to spread the gospel. They obeyed that great commission that Jesus gave them when he said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. But not just the disciples, but many others who were part of that first Christian community did the same. And Aristobulus got all the way to Spain, where if you've been on the road to Compostela, James went as well. And like James, Aristobulus made his way across the country to that northwestern corner where Compostela is, well known as the wettest and windiest part of Spain. But Aristobulus, it seems, wasn't finished there, and he found somewhere still wetter and still windier to journey onto, to the furthest outpost of empire, whose bishop he became. So if you are sitting here this morning, I'm standing here this morning, we have a great debt to Aristobulus because he was the first bishop of Britain. I bet you didn't know that. And there it is written up there, holy or Saint Aristobulus, apostle, martyr. Unfortunately, the Welsh martyred him. I'm sure they didn't mean to, but that's what they did, I'm afraid. But then the first bishop of Britain. Whether we are children of faith through Aristobulus or long-lost cousins of the Galatians, we're all in this story somewhere. This is the man, probably, who brought Christianity to Britain. So we owe him an enormous debt. And so as we finish, Barnabas may have just a few lines of the New Testament, and he may appear in just a few chapters, but without him, 2/3 of it might not be there at all. Unlike Paul, he doesn't stride across the pages of the Bible, but so much of it would never have been written without him, who is the architect of so much that through other people built the early church. There's a point where Paul says in his letter to the Christians in Thessalonica, he said, what will be our glory and our joy? It's you. You will be our glory and our joy. You people are our glory. Who will be my glory and my joy and your glory and your joy? You don't have to be in the spotlight to spread the light, to walk in the light, to be a disciple. Jesus said the greatest among you is the servant of all, something that we always find quite difficult really to swallow. And the church is built not on attention seeking, but on servant hearts and encouragers of other people. We're all human. Criticism often knocks you back, doesn't it? But encouragement can spur you on. It certainly does that to me. So be a Barnabas. Look for gifts in other people and make room for them. Be ready to spur them on, even if sometimes it might mean stepping back a bit yourself. So if one day Jesus says, not just what did you do for me, but how did you help others serve me, then maybe you and I might have something to say. It's not about us and how great we are. It's about how great God is. It's not about me or how great I might or might not be, but if I might put it this way, how great thou art. Let's just pray for a brief moment. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you give us many gifts, and these are gifts that are for the use of the whole church, for the benefit and the blessing of the whole church. And one of those gifts is to be an encourager. Lord, help us to be ready, not just to think about ourselves when we're in church, but to encourage others to see their gifts and to encourage other people to fan the flames of the gifting that you have given them. Lord, make us like Barnabas, make us encouragers, make us builders of church, so that more and more people will not see how great we might or might not be, but how great thou art. Amen.